What's up, guys? Hello, so Football Talk here, back after the NFL Combine and bringing you my list of the biggest winners and losers from the week. Really glad that we got to watch the event after it had to be cancelled due to COVID last year. Now, we need to put all of this into perspective. Tape is still king, but measurables and numbers allow us to separate guys who are grouped closer together and confirm what we saw on film, or make us go back to it if something doesn't quite add up. So I just want to highlight guys here who have given me reason to consider swapping them with somebody else in my current rankings. Of course, you can just look through every event and check this out numbers. I mean, the two Baylor guys, Kalen Barnes and Tyquan Thornton, running two of the top 3 times in the 40 certainly helped themselves, but I want to look at which guys had the best and worst all-around showings, starting with measurements that might have been different than expected, testing numbers overall, and then the on-field drills. I didn't want to add a ton of highly regarded names in the winners column, just because they more so confirmed what I already knew, rather than blew me away. So the first rounders that will come up here all just lit it up. By the way, there's been a lot of talk about this being a fast track, but I don't know what they could have really done at Lucas Oil Stadium to affect that other than the new turf that they added in 2020. So not sure how much difference that might have actually made, other than just having a little more bounce to it. And so I don't have to repeat myself all the time, I will reference the relative athletic score, or RAS in short, a few times here to put the numbers into perspective historically as well, which takes into account all of the measurements and athletic testing in relation to the position. So now let's start with those winners. First, he kicked off with the tight ends and wide receivers, and we'll go chronologically here, so to speak, which first with the massive tight end from the University of Virginia in Jelani Woods, measuring in at 6'7", 253 pounds, which is just below what he was listed at in college. Running 4.61 is a really good time for him, second best among tight ends behind the Maryland kid Chico Okonkwo. And Woods showed that burst after catching the ball as that gliding giant in those on-field drills as well. He also led the group with 24 reps on the bench press despite those long arms. That combination of size and speed earned him an RAS of 9.97. Woods once slipped on a dig route, and I still have questions about him being able to win as a route runner efficiently, especially on that intermediate level, since it's not like he's driving people off the ball as an inline Y necessarily either, but he certainly helped himself. And I also continue to like what I see from UCLA's Greg Dulcich, who I came out of the college season with as a top 4 tight end already, and he may finish higher than that. Next up, probably the biggest rise of this entire pre-draft process, wide receiver Christian Watson from North Dakota State. After looking like the best receiver at the Senior Bowl, Watson absolutely blew up the combine, running a 4.36 in the 40, jumping 38.5 inches in the vert, and 11 feet and 4 inches on the broad jump. That was the best mark from all the performance in Indy, by the way. I call him a certified freak on Twitter after backing up what we saw down in Mobile, as he received a nearly perfect RES of 9.98, thanks to prototype size at 6'4", 210 pounds as well. And I can't recall a single drop that he had in the on-field portion, other than one on a fade ball, which he just got his fingertips on, so I'm not really sure if you can count that. He's gone from a projected day 3 pick, simply because most people hadn't really seen him, to what I believe will ultimately be a top 50 pick, with room to move up. And another wide receiver that I want to talk about here, Calvin Austin from Memphis, finished top 3 among wide receivers in the 40 at 4.32, the vert at 39 inches, and just 1 inch behind Watson in the broad jump at 11.3, and the 20-yard shuttle as well at 4.07. He came in an inch taller than expected at 5'8", looked smooth running through the drills, tracked the deep ball naturally, and caught every pass in the gauntlet. He already looked really good releasing from press and creating separation throughout Senior Bowl practices, and while some other teams may value size to drop him down a bit, I think he's a really dynamic player, and the testing numbers back it up as well. Notable wide receiver performances here, Sky Moore from Western Michigan ran a 4.41 in the 40 and looked really smooth in the positional workout, and Alex Pierce from Cincinnati, who jumped out the gym and had a 4.41 himself at 211 pounds. Which has us moving on to day 2, where we had the big boys offensive line, and we're starting a tackle here with Callan Deach from Arizona State. His 4.9 in the 40 was just 100th of a second off the best time among offensive linemen at the combine. He was 1 inch off the top mark in the vert at 32.5 inches, and 300th of a second off in the 20-yard shuttle. You also saw the athleticism with the way he moved around with ease, redirecting laterally and delivering a tight punch. In an offensive tackle class that has a clear trio at the top, a couple names in that athletic project category, and then all kinds of different ways people have the other guys stacked up, he put himself on the radar as an intriguing mid-round pick, I believe. Obviously, NC State's Ike Ekwonu showed what a freakish large man he is by running the 40 in sub 5 seconds, and Abraham Lucas from Washington State is somebody that had a great Senior Bowl week and looked like one of the most athletic offensive tackles in Indy, just like I expected. And now let's look on the interior, where I want to highlight Zion Johnson, the guard out of Boston College. He had an excellent all-round showing, I thought, as well, with the 5.18s in the 40 being the one average number that he actually had. But he led the offensive line with 32 reps on the bench press and finished top 6 in the vert at 32 inches, the broad at 9.4, the free cone, and the 20-yard shuttle. I also thought he showed great ankle flexibility to keep his cleats in the turf when moving any direction during the on-field drills, and his movement skills looked a lot easier than a bunch of guys who didn't nearly have those kind of massive legs that just popped off the screen. This was especially valuable for Johnson, considering the other one of the top 2 ranked guards, in Kenyon Green from Texas A&M, who we'll get to in a little bit here, had such a rough day himself. Nebraska center Cam Jurgens also had an excellent workout as far as the interior offensive line goes, including 4.92 in the 40. And the final name for offense here, we saw the running backs finish off strong, which Breece Hall from Iowa State was just 200ths of a second off the best time for a running back at the combine at 4.39. He led the group with a 40-inch vert and was tied for third with a 10.6 broad jump, which at 5'11", 217 pounds, earned him an RES of 9.95. He also looked smooth stepping over and working around the backs on the field without dropping any passes, even though he does clap on it a little bit more than I'd like to see him. Breece only confirmed my belief in him being RB1 with a little more separation now, as I have him in that tier with Isaiah Spiller from Texas A&M and Kenneth Walker from Michigan State, who had a pretty good workout himself. And I also definitely liked what I saw from Iowa's Tyler Goodson, who's kind of one of my draft gems anyway, considering how low he is on most people's boards when I look through them. Looked as natural a receiver as any back not named James Cook from Georgia, and they both ran a 4.42, so that was really good for him. Which has us moving on to the defensive side of the ball, and I'm already cheating here by giving you 2 names that I just couldn't separate. Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt, the 2 defensive tackles out of Georgia. They just blew it up. Davis at 6'6", 341 pounds, running a 4.78 in the 40, might be the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, including a 1.68 10-yard split. He came up just an inch short of the best mark on the vert at 32 inches, and while not as many guys participated, he jumped nearly a foot further in the broads than any other interior defensive lineman at 10.3. For that, he received a perfect RES at 10.0. I actually asked the guy who posts these on Twitter, @MathBomb, if you're interested, and he said this will probably be the first score since Calvin Johnson that may never be beaten. Davis also moved way too easy during the wave drill and others for such a mountain of a man. The funny part is his teammate Devontae Wyatt was actually the only interior defensive lineman with a better 40 time at 4.77, just beating him out, and a 10-yard split at 1.66, also at over 300 pounds, just so you know. During the on-field drills, he showed great burst and ability to change directions, and along with those really violent hands when hitting the backs and being able to dip the shoulder to get low as he cornered. And we saw that on display during the 2 days that he was whooping ass down in Mobile as well, by the way. Those dogs were so incredible that we actually barely talked about UConn's massive nose tackle Travis Jones, who was top 5 among tier defensive line in all the drills he participated in, including a 4.92 in the 40, and being tied for the best mark in the free cone drill at 4.33 at 325 pounds himself. And since we haven't talked about enough Georgia defenders yet, let's take a look at the biggest freak of them all, probably in my opinion, Trayvon Walker. He ran the 3rd fastest 40 at the combine among edge defenders, 4.51, at 272 pounds. He was good in the jumps, and he was top 3 in both agility events, the free cone and the shuttle, with Michigan's Aiden Hutchinson being the only one to beat him there in both. Unfortunately, he only ended up with an RES of 9.99, which is just behind the perfect one that Davis got. More importantly, people his size should not be able to move as easy in space and go through the back drills the way he did. And Walker's hips looked so loose running the figure 8 and bending that inside shoulder. The dude is an athletic phenom, and talked about this before, how he has played everything from a 1 to a 7 technique at Georgia, and depending on the team, I could see him line up in any of those spots at the next level too. Obviously, Virginia Tech's Amari Barno running the fastest 40 for any D lineman in combine history at 4.36 was highly impressive, and the guy in between Barno and Walker from a 40 perspective in Ole Miss's Sam Williams has had a phenomenal pre-draft process himself, which I talked about already in my piece on the biggest risers from the college all-star events. He just has some off-field stuff that needs answering, so the interviews were big for him. On the second level of the defense, we have linebacker Christian Harris from Alabama, who was just 200ths of a second off the fastest 40 time among off-ball linebackers at the combine at 4.44, and just 1 inch off the top mark in the broad jump as he levitated 11 feet. He also looked sudden in his change of direction and caught the ball well with his arm extended away from his body, which you don't always see from linebackers. I think he reminded people that there might just not be this top two at the position, with Utah's Devin Lloyd and Georgia's Nakobe Dean, and then a massive drop off. I mean, following the 2020 season, it looked like Harris might be a top 20 pick. He didn't have the greatest junior campaign, but the dude can run and hit. Of course, with Trey Anderson from Montana State, running the fastest 40 of the group at 4.42, and showing tremendous movement skills in space, he continues to climb this draft cycle, as I already talked extensively about him in my Biggest Rises segment a couple of weeks ago, and he'll be pretty high up in my final linebacker rankings, as well as Chad Newell from Wyoming. I'm still finishing my grades, but my god, is his tape fun to watch. He didn't run as well, but he was such an easy mover in coverage drills too. And then two more guys in the secondary, starting with cornerback Zion McCollum from Sam Houston State. This guy's elite measurements for the position at 6'2", 200 pounds. He was one of the few corners to do every single test at the combine, other than the bench press, and he finished top 3 in all of them, with a 4.33 in the 40, a 39.5-inch verts, an 11-foot broad jump, 6.48 in the 3-cone drill, and a 3.49 in the 20-yard shuttle. Those two numbers in the agility drills were the best among all combine performance, by the way, and he was the only one to go sub 4 seconds in the shuttle. That got him an RES of 9.99. He also looked pretty fluid for a long guy, and high-punted the ball well. There was some chat around him, probably testing well, but I don't think anybody quite expected this. Cincinnati's Sauce Gardner got a lot of pop for running the low 4.4s and moving extremely well in space after measuring in at 6'3", and to Rick Woolen, the 6'4", 205-pound UTSA corner, running 4.26 is just absurd, and this 42-inch vert was higher than anybody else in Indy, but there was some stiffness in his hips, which was expected at that size, so I wanted to give McCollum more of the spotlight here. And finally, safety JT Woods from Baylor, often referred to as the other Baylor safety, and I love Jalen Petrie himself, who looked really fluid during the on-field portion of the workout, but Woods was the one making highlights. 0.02 of a second off the top 40 time for safety at the combine at 4.36, and along with the best vert among the group at 39.5 inches, the fourth longest broad jump at 10.8, and he also displayed all the hips during on-field drills and caught the ball very well, while finishing the day and the whole event actually by high-stepping into the end zone, as the other safeties provided him a convoy for fun. Even with a really low weight score, because he's only 195 pounds, Woods received an RES of 9.87. Another huge workout in my opinion was the one of Georgia's Louis Cine, who I love to watch because of how aggressive and physical he is, but people thought he might be a limited athlete. With a 40 time of 4.37, just 0.03 of a second off the top safety mark, along with an 11-foot 1 broad jump, which actually led the group, and how sudden he was in the way he could flip those hips, he put those concerns to bed. And Dax Hill from Michigan was very impressive as well here. Of course, with events like this, there has to be a loser column as well, which is a pretty harsh word, but the guys mentioned here just didn't live up to expectations, or really stood out in a negative way next to their peers. One honorable or not so honorable mention here, the Oklahoma fullback Jeremiah Hall was kind of set up to disappoint among the tight end group, so I didn't really want to shame him, but he had the worst mark at every single drill, other than the bench, so teams that want to carry a fullback or H-back who contributes on special teams will probably save their call for once the actual draft is wrapped up. And the first true one here is a surprising one, with wide receiver Traylon Burks from Arkansas. His combine performance simply did not live up to the hype, measuring in at 6'2", which was an inch shorter than expected, with slightly sub 10-inch hands, after we were told that he needed special 5XL gloves, so that kinda is BS probably. And considering there was some talk about him running the low 4.4s or even high 4.3s, Mick's running the 10th slowest 40 time among wide receivers at 4.55, a little disappointing. That's still a good time for a 225-pound wide receiver, but he was also bottom 10 in both the jumps and was tied for the second worst 3-cone drill at 7.28. He didn't have a bad field workout, but he didn't nearly test like the freakish athlete they would perceive him to be. So yeah, just a little disappointed because I thought he might put on a show here. And the other wide receiver that needs to be mentioned here, Wendell Robinson from Kentucky, who was an average tester across the board at the combine, with a 4.44 in the 40 being easily his best mark, along with being tied for the fourth lowest broad jump among wide receivers at 9.10. But he really hurt himself with his measurements, coming in at only 5'8", which was 3 inches shorter than his college height, 178 pounds, which was 7 pounds fewer than he was listed at, and with the shortest arms in combine history at just under 28 inches. And that lack of arm length shows up on tape when he has to dive for balls that seem to be in the vicinity for catches on the run. There was actually 6 guys running the 4.6s among this group, by the way, including a player that I like quite a bit and produced David Bell. So considering how fast some of those guys were at the top, that must have been disappointing for them. And that actually brings us to the only quarterback of the day in Caleb Ellaby from Western Michigan. Not that it matters a ton, but Ellaby did participate in 3 drills, so we have to note that he did have the worst vertical jump, 25.5 inches, and free cone by quite a bit at 7.57 among quarterbacks, along with the second worst broad jump at 9.3. But much more significant was the up and down inaccuracy trying to throw timing routes, where some balls would sail over the heads of receivers by a couple of yards. I haven't watched a ton of tape on him, and I don't want to put too much stock in this. From what I've seen during the season, this is a big guy with a strong arm, but nothing really popped for me in Indy, and at least I know he's a very limited athlete now. Thankfully for him, this quarterback class is very shallow past the top 7 or 8 names. Moving on to day 2 with the offensive line, and first up was offensive tackle / guard Darren Kennard from Kentucky. Anybody who remembers Kennard being a consensus top 20 pick heading into the 2021 college football season needs to check out his most recent tape and see how much he's fallen from grace. Kennard played right tackle at Kentucky at like 345, 350 pounds at times, and there were major questions about his feet being good enough to play tackle. I've looked at him as a guard all along, and I think with the right coaching, he could still be a quality one, but he has not helped himself recently. Kennard went to the Senior Bowl at about 20 pounds less than his playing weight, and you still saw how much better he looked inside, even though he did whiff on some quick sets and stuff. Now he showed up at the Combine even lighter at 322 pounds, and that's a good thing in general, just looking more athletic overall, but he still had one of the slowest 40 times among the offensive line at 5.31, and he looked sloppy and gassed during the on-field workout. Like the first time they did the wave drill, he seemed to struggle finishing strong in the sprint at the end, which is really not good to see. Arkansas offensive tackle Myron Cunningham also looked kinda out of shape and ran slow, but that would give us 3 guys from one school in this column, so I didn't want to do that. He was projected as a late round guy anyway, so now let's move on to somebody who was actually looked at by many as the top rated offensive guard in Kenyon Green from Texas A&M. He had a rather disappointing showing at the Combine as well, with just 20 reps on the bench press, running a 5.24 in the 40, broad jumping 8 feet and 6 inches, and clocking the second slowest 20-yard shuttle at 5.12. Those were all below average among the offensive line, while being tied for the 8th worst spark in the broad and the 2nd worst in the free count drill like I just said. More importantly, he just looked pretty sluggish changing directions and going through the field workout. If you're looking for more an inside zone duo-based rushing attack, I wouldn't be too concerned, but teams that ask their guards to pull and get out in space a lot might be a little concerned now. And once again, this just helps Zion Johnson's case as OG1, like I already mentioned. The last offensive guy here, running back Kyron Williams from Notre Dame, actually has some of the best running back tape of this class, but the 2 questions with him were size / power and the explosiveness. Williams measured in at just 5'9", 194 pounds with 28.5 inch arms, and he ran the slowest 40 of any running back at the Combine at 4.65, and he also had the 3rd lowest broad at 9 feet 8 inches. His RES score of just 1.75 reflects that. He did look pretty good going through the running back drills, and he's also just a natural pass catcher, but that actually is kind of the point here, where he was literally asked if he's a 3rd down back at the podium, and he responded that he's an every down guy, but then to come in very light, having the slowest 40 among the group, and then excelling when allowed to run routes and catch the ball, that kind of paints a picture here for him. Don't get me wrong, Kyron is still my RB4 in his draft, but he was kind of in a tier by himself for me, and he's only confirmed that in my opinion, while others might have dropped him down a couple of spots. Flipping over the defense, the first name here is the interior defensive lineman Neil Farrell from LSU. It certainly wasn't a good year to test badly for big guys, when we had a record amount of 300-pounders run sub 5 seconds, but regardless of who was there, Farrell just had a rough Combine showing, with the 3rd worst marks at the entire event in the vert at 21.5 inches and the 40-yard dash at 5.41, which are the only 2 numbers that he put up actually, which his RES ending up at 1.31 was the worst of the entire Combine, I believe. Along with that, he was too tall going through the on-field drills and really struggled to make sharper changes of direction. I didn't like what I saw in the drill with the 4 pop-up dummies, where they put different pass rush moves on them. His spin in particular looked unusable in that mold, and he just hasn't done himself any favors trying to project him forward as probably a 2-down run stuffer who can create some push up the middle when opponents do throw the ball and he's on the field. And then on the edge, Kingsley Enagbari from South Carolina. The question with him was, is he a limited athlete? Because on his college tape, he won a lot with power and length, with the long arm in particular being his favorite move. He had the 4th slowest 40 time among defensive ends at the combine, and I wouldn't even count Florida's Zach Carter or Houston's Logan Hall as actual edge defenders. The one other name here I'll get to in a minute. Enikbari was slightly below average in the jumps and didn't do the bench or one of the agility drills, which is actually what I really wanted to see. During positional workouts, there was some evident tightness in his hips trying to turn the corner as he cleared the bags and bending around the hoops. That's not good in a loaded edge class, where if you go to Pro Football Focus for example, he was one of the highest rated pass rushers and all-around players at the position this past season, but you have to question how high his ceiling really is. And I want to quickly mention Cincinnati's Myjai Sanders here, who showed up in Indy at just 228 pounds, which is nearly 20 less than he had in Mobile, and he tested rather badly as well. He was sick apparently, and I'm confused why he even worked out, but I don't put a ton of stock in this, and neither should you. What I do have to talk about here is Trey Williams from Arkansas, the edge rusher slash linebacker. He worked out with linebackers, really a true edge guy. So I just talked about Enikbari not doing himself any favors. I don't know if Trey Williams was balled up by some kind of injury or anything else, but he had one of the worst performances you will ever see at the combine. So let's have something positive here. He did have the 3rd best 20-yard shuttle among the D-line. Unfortunately, he was the only D-end above 5 seconds in the 40. His vert of 26.5 inches was the worst by 2.5 inches among true edges. His broad jump was basically off by a foot compared to the next closest guy, which despite nearly perfect linebacker measurements, although like I said he is an edge player, just was listed that way, got him one of the lowest RES scores at 1.47 outside of Farrell who I just talked about. And having to work with the linebackers didn't do him any favors either, since he looked a bit clunky going through any type of coverage drill. I haven't had a chance to dive into his tape really. I do remember him giving Texas A&M's Kenyon Green some issues when he was a left tackle against him, but those are abysmal testing numbers, and especially on the edge, there's a certain cutoff for athleticism where you usually don't see guys show this poorly have any long-term success in the pros. So I hope for him that we'll get a statement on this, and he can show us otherwise at his pro day. As far as another linebacker here, Michigan's Josh Ross had about as bad as an RES as Williams, and I believe he'll be no more than a rotational run-stopping linebacker in the inside and early downs. So once again, let's finish off with 2 secondary guys. Quarterback Jermaine Wall from Virginia Tech. He's a guy who made his money in the ACC and also at East-West Shrine practices for that matter by crowding receivers with those long arms and showing the physicality to not allow late separation. So he was projected as a press man, press build type of corner, but then he ran a full 10th of a second slower than any other cornerback at the combine at 4.68. And there was some stiffness in those hips, despite actually only being 6 foot flats and 180 pounds. When I thought he'd be slightly taller than that, he may have disqualified himself from being an outside corner at least, and will have to transition to strong safety, or maybe as a tight end specialist. And once again, still haven't done any of his 21 tape, but there are just almost no 4.6 corners in the league, and this is nearly 4.7. I thought from the limited stuff that I did see, this is a smart player who's willing to tackle, but not having done any other drills to maybe help himself there, he might get buried in a deep corner class. And Washington's Kyler Gordon is a guy on the outside who didn't nearly live up to the hype, running the 4.5s and also measuring in half an inch short of the 6 foot mark. And finally at safety, Georgia Tech's Wanye Thomas, and I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce this the right way. This is a guy whose tape I'll get to very soon, because I want to study more of the other Georgia Tech safety, Tariq Carpenter. Thomas finished bottom 4 among safeties in the 40 at 4.55, the vert at 34 inches, and the broad jump at 10.2. More importantly, he just looked really stiff trying to flip those hips, in particular going down the line and getting them around by nearly 100 degrees. That was a struggle. And he also slipped a couple of times during the positional drills. I can't speak much on the play at this point, but I do know Carpenter was used in deep coverage quite a bit, so Thomas better be able to cover tight ends, be a quality +1 in the box or something like that for me to be interested in him along with NFL teams. As a side note, I know Notre Dame's Kyle Hamilton, one of the top 3 or so prospects overall in this class, was tied for the slowest 40 time among safeties at 4.59, but he watched the footage and he's swerving left and right outside the lines constantly. The jumps were great and so was his field workout, so I'm not really concerned about him. And thankfully all these guys have a chance to redeem themselves at their pro days, and they already had the ability to talk to teams and get the medicals out of the way for the most part. But that's gonna wrap things up for me here. Once again, here's the list real quick. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and share it with a couple of friends, especially those ones who like to geek out about the draft, because I'll have a lot more stuff coming up, starting with the top 10 rankings and honorable mentions at every single position in a couple of weeks. I'll go one after the other here. I truly believe nobody on the internet does more in-depth breakdowns, so please consider checking those out. Next week I won't have anything coming out on YouTube because I still need to study a lot of players, but stay tuned to my social media channels, linked in the video description and on the screen right now, for a bunch of clips that I stumble upon in my evaluations, and all kinds of thoughts on the class, as well as free agency, which you should see a video pop up right now on my favorite fits for all 32 teams from a couple of weeks ago. Either way, stay locked in all of that, and get ready for extensive draft coverage. So until then, see you later, peace!